good morning to you. We've sort of hinted at the first story in the Daily Mail already in entertainment, this baby.
Yes, you know, I think it's fantastic that Prince William and his wife has decided to acknowledge his mother, you know, Diana.
And the grandfather and the great-grandmother.
Yes, but
kind of covered everybody, really.
Particularly Diana, though, because Diana, in my experience, working in the 80s and the 90s on HIV and AIDS, she was one of the very first people to actually try and remove the stigma that there was. And frankly, she was really the only royal that got my attention. And I happened to be lucky enough to have met her a couple of times. And I think she was a very, very special person. So it's great that, you know, Prince William has acknowledged his mother. And there's some talk, you know, about Diana as a person they'd like to disappear. But he has said, no, she's my mother and I love her. And here she is, remembered in the form of my daughter. So,
remember that famous picture, and it's always stuck in my mind, was and it seems like a daft thing to mention, but the fact that she touched HIV patients and AIDS patients, and just that simple gesture did so much to break down those barriers
she
years ago.
Very untypical of the royal family. She was much more human and willing to be seen as human. And to do what she did at a time when there was mass hysteria about this new disease, this woman decided, I am going to take off my gloves and touch these people. She was the right person at the right time, and I think it's fantastic. I wouldn't normally talk about royal babies and things like that, but Diana remains special in my heart, and clearly her sons too.
Do you think that by being a princess rather than a prince, that this little baby has been spared being a spare part, if you like, because all the focus is now on the older brother, because direct in line to the throne, that this princess is likely to have a life all of her own, instead of like Harry was always playing second fiddle to William.
Well, hopefully, you know, she will have a fairly normal life, but obviously she won't. You know, they're
already talking about her being a sort of glamour puss. So.
Well, you know, it depends on how she looks, doesn't it? You know, she might not be the prettiest adult, but you know, you get the contrast of a royal baby born at Paddington, St Mary's Hospital, Paddington, and you get the contrast of a baby born in a migrant boat, you know, fleeing Libya on the way to Africa, and there's that, and that tells us something about the craziness in this world, you know, where somebody's been born with more privilege than anybody could make use of, and then somebody struggling for life in a boat. So that contrast hit me enormously. Let's
move to South Africa. We sort of talked about this with Unsalisi earlier, Pretoria Times.
Yes.
It's an interesting story because it had sort of passed last week, this Stransham Ford case, but it's back in the courts, and it looks like it's going to run for a lot longer now.
Yes, and I think it's good that this issue is being brought out, you know, the issue of assisted death, if you like, for people who want it, frankly. And I think that it's a brave thing for South Africa to consider, and it's something I think we should consider.
It's sort of being foisted upon them, though, is it? It sounds like had this case not come up and he'd not been an advocate in Cape Town, that perhaps we wouldn't be discussing this across international news channels. But the fact is, this is having to be discussed, and the fact that it's now going to be forced up into the Constitutional Court and the Parliament, this is going to become a national discussion. Might not just be in South Africa, it could be in other places too.
And it needs to be. You know, last week we discussed, you know, the idea of having a plan for your potential departure from the world, you know, for older people. And I think there's something to be said for that, because if you know, the essence of this story has to do with, you know, is life always, you know, worth it? You know, when you're just existing instead of living. There's a big difference between existing and living, and I think if it's deemed, you know, that the quality of life will never return to you, that will make, you know, life worthwhile, and you have said in advance that should my life, you know, become untenable, if you like, that I'd like, you know, to be assisted out of this world. I think that's a very mature and brave thing to do, and I think that this country, the United Kingdom, should consider criteria that enables people to opt out if they want to, in the right circumstances. So I think it's good that South Africa has brought this to the fore. The United Kingdom need to be brave enough to have this conversation as well.
I have to say on a personal note that my opinion on this changed a few years ago. My first boss in television had terminal cancer, went to the Dignitas clinic in Switzerland, and I'd been doing some work with one of the big cancer charities, and to me it was like very anti. And then I saw the interview she had done with Sky News and the Daily Telegraph, and I suddenly got what she was talking about, and that was that these people that might want assisted suicide as an option might end up in a position where they can't ask for it. So we're talking about a very, 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 very small number of people here that may ever need this, and this isn't carte blanche for suddenly everybody going to opt to sort of check out of planet Earth.
Yes, and that's true. Most of all, I think what it tells us should happen is that we should have a life plan and a death plan. You know, if it comes down to it, and I'm a vegetable in a coma, is it in my interest to be held, you know, lingering in life? No, it's not. And I think that we should be able to say, whilst we're still rational and able to do so, that in certain circumstances we want to opt out, and that should be respected, frankly.
Let's move on. Briefly, we can look at the national, UAE, how Israel killed Gaza civilians. Haven't got much time on this subject.
No, you know, and all I need to say on it is that I think it was fairly obvious, really, that the onslaught that we witnessed last year against Palestinians in Gaza was a cruel punishment, and I think that it was obvious that that was going on. And it's interesting that in this story, soldiers are admitting, you know, that they deliberately killed people.
And were ordered to do so.
And were ordered to do so. And I think that it's absolutely abhorrent. It needs to be investigated, and people need to go to prison for it. It's unacceptable that this happens in a modern world. And the world knew it was happening, and Western governments particularly colluded with it.
But now we know it's out in the open. Vernal Scott, many thanks for joining me on The Papers. You're watching This Day Live here on Arise News. Stay with us.